Hi, I'm Umbreon Libris. The other day I was doing research for an upcoming video, and naturally I went to Bulbapedia. But then, on the article about TMs, I noticed it says something weird. Here, I'll actually just read it to you. From Fire Red and Leaf Green onward, TMs have been depicted as compact discs. In Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, these discs are inserted into the TM case, and the case itself teaches the Pokemon the move. So I had a vague memory of, something like that. I thought there was something about the TM case attaching to the Pokeball, and that's how the TM gets taught, but I didn't know for sure, and so I wanted to get confirmation. So I didn't have Fire Red and Leaf Green handy, so I just went looking for a video, and I found one that shows teaching a TM. And while most other games have a TM and HM's pocket in your bag, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, the TM case is actually a key item that you have to use to be able to see what TMs you have. And in there, it shows the discs inside of the case, and it shows them at different spots in the case as you scroll through the list, so it really just looks like that's where the discs are kept. And then when you select a TM to use, then it shows the Pokemon, it says machine set, and shows the disc being held in front of the Pokemon, but this is very similar to the animation for using items of other kinds, like a potion and such. And so there doesn't really seem to be anything about the TM case doing anything. But I figured that idea had to come from somewhere, so I went digging. And the item description for the TM case doesn't mention that either. The Teachy TV, an item that I always forget about, that doesn't say anything about the TM case having any function besides being a case. There's no NPC that gives you the TM case, you just kind of get it automatically when you get your first TM, so there isn't any dialogue about how the TM case works. So I was, running out of ideas, so I asked some friends, and they didn't have any idea where it came from either. And so I just kept digging deeper. The article on the TM case itself on Bulbapedia doesn't say anything about that. The discussion page on the article about TMs doesn't mention it either. I went through the edit history to see if I could find the earliest instance of that phrase and see if whoever had added it in had left some kind of note about what the source was, and I did find it, but no, there was no note. That phrasing about how the TM case itself teaches the Pokemon the move first appeared on April 13th of 2009. That was in the trivia section of the article, and it was moved to the introduction in 2012, but it's pretty much stayed unchanged in over 11 years, and nobody has questioned it? But where did that come from? Where did my idea that the TM case was involved in teaching the Pokemon the move come from? Because now I'm thinking that I just read that on Bulbapedia and assumed that there was a source to it, that it was fact, and, now that became ingrained in my brain. That's not the only weird claim that they have on the article about TMs. It also says that, oops, I just accidentally tapped on the screen and it scrolled way to the bottom. There it is. So it also says that in the TCG, they are shown as small boxes that the Pokemon's Pokeball would be inserted into. And that also felt like familiar information to me. And if you look at the cards, well, yes, they are boxes, but where does the idea that you put the Pokeball in the box come from? Because I don't know. Okay, so I actually figured this one out, because I was looking through my card collection looking for the TM cards that I have, just to put nice scans on there. And I found this Japanese cards that I have. This is called, basically, Will's TM #1, and it actually shows the box open with the Pokeball inside of it. This isn't the only card that shows this. There are several other cards that show the box open and the Pokeball inside. But the thing is that all of the cards that have this art, that have art showing this, are Japanese exclusives. There have been no cards showing the TM box open issued in English. And so what would have been the trouble of just putting a direct reference to one of the cards that shows how it works in the article? Or even just putting the image right there. Problem solved. The article also says that The Sylph Company has distributed a pamphlet containing information on TMs and HMs, indicating that they are at least partially developed or produced by the company. What pamphlets? In what games? Where can I find them? I don't know. Bulbapedia can be a great resource. It has a lot of information, and because it's a community effort, it has the potential, at least, of gathering insights from a bunch of different people. If I just need to quickly look up something simple like what level a Pokemon evolves at or what moves it learns, I'm more likely to go to Cerebi, just because I think it's easier to find that kind of information there. But whenever I'm doing research for a video, or if I'm looking for something that isn't strictly factual, I always go to Bulbapedia. Like the trivia about what Pokemon are based on or inspired by. That kind of stuff is never mentioned in official sources, and so it's really great to have the perspectives of a whole bunch of people. Those sections are much better because they can contain the opinions and the insights of potentially hundreds of people. But one of the big flaws of Bulbapedia is that it doesn't always state sources. So it can be really hard to tell when something comes from official media, or if it comes from press statements and interviews, although that kind of stuff does usually get linked to, and versus when it comes from fan insights and interpretations. A couple of months ago or so, I was having this discussion with Ron, with TrueGreen7 on Twitter, about whether Aromatisse was intended to have elements of a Plague Doctor, and they just weren't super well integrated into the design. That was his position. Or whether that was more something that fans saw in the design, but that wasn't necessarily part of the concept to begin with. That was my position. We went back and forth a couple of times, no big deal, but then someone else chimed in with a link to the Bulbapedia article on Aromatisse that says that Aromatisse is partially based on a Plague Doctor. And someone else responded with something like, "Thank you for finally linking to a source," as if the origins section of a Bulbapedia article is fact. It isn't. There is no official source that I know of, at least, that says one way or the other whether Aromatisse was intended to be based on a Plague Doctor. But there's also no indication on Bulbapedia that this section is more opinion-based than the others. I also find that the way that information is presented can be pretty frustrating. Information from the anime, the manga, the games, they're all usually presented on the same page, and so it can be hard to figure out what comes from what canon. The other day I was doing research for another upcoming video, this one about legendary Pokemon, and I wanted to confirm under what circumstances you encounter certain legendary Pokemon. And there's a whole article about all the different legendary Pokemon. Sometimes it talks about how you encounter them, but sometimes it doesn't. But then if I go to the page about the Pokemon itself, it only says where you encounter it. No mention of at what point in the game, or if there is any kind of requirement, or if there's other mentions of the Pokemon in the game. Although sometimes that kind of information does appear in the trivia section of the page rather than in the section about the games. Or worse, the section on where to find the Pokemon just says event for certain mythicals, and doesn't link to any kind of description about what that event was like. I figured this one out too. There is an events section to the page. It's just a little bit further down the page, and maybe I should have seen it in the table of contents, but what would have been the harm of just saying see below, or just putting a link that jumps straight to the list of all of the events? And this section does list all of the events that Pokemon was distributed in, and it links to a description of exactly what the event was like. Except in this example of Magearna that I was just looking at, the description of the event just says literally how to get the Pokemon, how to unlock the mystery gift. And it doesn't say anything about what that event actually unlocks in the game. Like that you have to pick up the Magearna from the Antiquity of Ages shop, or that there's some mildly amusing dialogue with the delivery man. That information, as far as I could tell, is just not in there. For some reason, the kind of information that I was looking for was best and most consistently presented on the pages about the groups of Pokemon, like the Light Trio or whatever, but not every Pokemon belongs to a group. So how am I supposed to find this kind of information if I don't already know what I'm looking for before going in? You've probably heard that Wikipedia is not a reliable source because it can be edited by anyone, and so you don't always know where the information is coming from. But you've probably also heard that Wikipedia is a decently reliable source precisely because it can be edited by anyone, so it should reflect the consensus on a topic, and most of the time it does link back to the source of the information. So even though you probably shouldn't cite it in an academic paper, it's a great starting point for your research, and you can follow the references to find more reliable sources. In theory, the same should be true of Bulbapedia, but unfortunately, Bulbapedia doesn't have the same benefit of scale that Wikipedia has. Wikipedia has a large team of editors that make sure that the articles conform to the site's standards. I don't know very much about how Bulbapedia is run, but I'm sure that the editorial team is not that big. But I also think that the standards, or at least the approach to standards, isn't as solid, and so you end up with a whole bunch of information that isn't sourced, which hurts the reliability of Bulbapedia as the starting point for your research. But just to be clear, this isn't like Bulbapedia is terrible and you shouldn't use it. This is more like an acknowledgement that Bulbapedia is flawed and that I hope it can be better so that it can be a better resource for all of us. Thank you for watching, and if you've had your own frustrations with Bulbapedia, I would love to commiserate in the comments. And I hope that you like this sort of vloggy, not totally scripted kind of video where I just talk about what's on my mind. I'm planning on doing something like this more or less once every 3 months. And thank you, of course, to all of my patrons for supporting me, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter.